What's up, guys? UFC 310. Fantastic card. Great fights throughout the whole thing, even from the prelims all the way to the main event. But Bilal pulling out did definitely hurt the card. We all wanted to see the Bilal and Shavkat fight, but we do have a replacement with Ian Garry, and the main event is now Alexandre Pantoja versus Asakura. 14 total fights on the card, which is a lot, but structured very differently. Bryce Mitchell versus Kron Gracie is on the main card, whereas Aljamain Sterling and Movsar Evloev are on the prelims. They're not even the featured prelim fight. They're darn near the early prelims, where Chris Weidman versus Eryk is at. But Nate Landwehr versus duo Choi is on the main card too, which is an incredible fight. But when you got them on the main card, but then Dominick Reyes versus Anthony Smith as the featured prelim fight, Vicente Luque is on the prelims, Sterling and Evloev, Chris Weidman's on the early prelims, so is Michael Chiesa versus Max Griffin. Like, it's structured kind of different, but regardless, amazing fights throughout the whole thing, and that's not including Clay Guida versus Chase Hooper, Cody Durden versus Joshua Van. Joshua Van just keep fighting, man. That guy's never going to stop fighting. The guy's already had 3 fights this year, and it was scheduled many more against Ciryl and Tatsuro Taira and various other opponents. This guy wants to stay busy, and the fans appreciate him for that. He's a fun fighter to watch, and going up against Cody Durden is going to be a fantastic fight. The only thing that it lacks is like a strong main event that most fans care about, right? Alexandre Pantoja versus Asakura is a good fight, but it's a flyweight championship main event, which most fans aren't going to care as much about, and it might drop the pay-per-view buys a bit, but I think it's great. I think that the co-main event, Ciryl Gane versus Alexander Volkov, which still always is forgettable for some reason. Not that the fight is bad, but the fact that that fight is on the card always escapes my mind. But I would have to say that the prospect of the night, there's a few of them, but Joshua Van is definitely the first. Incredibly talented, has the potential to be a high-ranked flyweight, and extremely fun to watch. The stake of the night, the fighter that needs a win here is Clay Guida. He's an absolute legend, over 60 fights professionally, but he is coming off 2 losses. He's 1-3 in his last 4 fights. He won't get cut. I don't think if he loses to Chase Hooper, he'll be cut from the UFC, but he needs a win here in a matchup that seems to be using him as a stepping stone for the up-and-coming Chase Hooper. The fighter of the night, or fighters, I would say, are Shavkat Rakhmonov and Asakura. These are the most popular fighters on the card, especially Shavkat. I mean, the guy's over 2 million followers on Instagram, which is far more than anyone else on the card. Even over double Ciryl Gane's Instagram following. I think he has a second most, but Asakura being in the main event and having the whole country of Japan behind him, he's a very big deal over there. The banger of the night, the most explosive fun fight on the card, is Nate Landwehr versus duo Choi, and both always go for the finish. That's gonna be an exciting fight, man. The sleeper of the night, the most underrated fight on the card, is Randy Brown versus Bryan battle. This is gonna be a great one. A lot of people aren't talking about this fight, but it's between 2 lower end top 15 caliber fighters. I think both Randy Brown and Bryan battle are around the same skill level, and with Battle's massive improvements, more aggressive with the striking, I think he should bring a good fight to Randy Brown, who's a lot slicker, moves on the outside, and uses his reach as an advantage. That should be an amazing fight, man. And then the fight of the night is, of course, the co-main event. The best fight on the card, Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Ian Garry. Maybe the highest skill level fight on the entire card. Both fighters can strike, both fighters can grapple, both are incredibly tall for their division. I mean, they say Shavkat's 6'1", but when you look at him up against Ian Garry, they're like the same height at 6'3". I cannot wait for that co-main event, man. And with that, let's go right to the first fight, which includes a short notice replacement. Kennedy Nzechukwu is stepping in on short notice against Luque Brasi from The Godfather. No, it's Lucas Bresky, who was originally supposed to fight Teles Teixeira, and Kennedy just fought like a few weeks ago for the first time in the heavyweight division, and he's stepping up again at heavyweight against a finisher, a fighter who beat Walter Walker but is 1-4 in the UFC. Got destroyed by Mick Parkin in his last fight. I'm gonna go with Kennedy Nzechukwu. I think he's faster, actually way faster. Lucas Bresky's kind of slow, even though he's not a blob, but he's not really fast anywhere. Kennedy's gonna have the speed advantage. He's also technically a better striker and way more precise with his strikes, while also having about a 4.5-inch reach advantage. Kennedy Nzechukwu, I'm going with a second round TKO. Then we go to Clay Guida versus Chase Hooper. Clay Guida's very, very old now. He's way out of his prime. He's like 10 years past his prime, whereas Chase Hooper is only getting better. His performance against Slava Claus was amazing. Submissions are lethal. I think he should be able to submit Clay Guida if Guida wants to go to the ground, but Chase Hooper is getting better with his striking. I think he's been doing a lot more weight training, getting stronger in his fights, but Clay Guida is going to be slower. He will resort to his wrestling, eventually getting submitted by Chase Hooper. So I'm going Chase Hooper by a second round submission. And then we go to Michael Chiesa versus Max Griffin. I'm going to go with Michael Chiesa. Max Griffin doesn't have the best takedown defense. If there's anywhere to the fight that Chiesa can finish the fight, it is on the ground. He's big for the weight class. He has good top control and good submissions while he's on top as well. Max Griffin is the better striker of the two. He's cleaner with a lot of techniques. His boxing is going to be way ahead of Chiesa's, who will panic sometimes if the opponent puts too much pressure with their striking, just like Kevin Holland did. And Max Griffin has more volume, so I can see Griffin landing the jab, trying to connect it with a 1-2 or even an uppercut to intercept a takedown, but I do see eventually Chiesa getting the fight to the ground, either winning a decision because of his top pressure, but I can also see him getting a submission probably in the second or third rounds via arm triangle choke or something. So I'm going with Michael Chiesa here, and maybe by a decision or a late submission. And then we go to Cody Durden versus Joshua Van. Cody Durden wants this fight. He says he's going to put on a masterclass performance against Joshua Van. Kind of take away the hype from Van. But I don't know, man. I'm going to go with Joshua in this fight. I think he's the better striker of the two. He has good takedown defense. Durden has some strong wrestling. He showed that against Charles Johnson, who's the same guy that beat Joshua Van. Knocked him out in the third round, but Durden wrestled that guy into a decision. So it's not going to be necessarily a wrestler versus striker matchup, but the strengths of the two fighters is going to replicate that. Durden is most likely going to get outstruck, and the way that he would win the fight is through his wrestling. But he could land punches off of that, takedown threats, get Joshua Van to lower his hands, and then Durden connects with some big shots and then goes to a takedown after, stuff like that. He has a lot more variety to go to, but I do think that Joshua Van is going to be on point with his takedown defense in this fight, land big shots, big leg kicks as well, and Durden likes to put a lot of pressure on his opponents, but his defense can be read quite easily by good strikers. You saw this against Bruno Silva, who knocked him out with an uppercut because Durden will sometimes lower his head as a reaction to punches. And Joshua Van is powerful with every punch he can throw. Every single form of his boxing is very, very strong. Sometimes he'll lean back. Cody Durden will lean back with his hands down like he did in moments against Tagir Lampakov. And Joshua Van can read that for the 1-2 combo. Disengage, reset, land a leg kick, pumping out jabs again, trying to read for Cody Durden's next head movement so he can intercept it with an uppercut or a hook or something like that. And eventually Durden's going to have to shoot takedowns. But I do think Joshua Van is going to win the fight by a decision. And if he wins here, I think Joshua Van is going to be ranked in the top 15. And then we go to the featured fight in the early prelims, Chris Weidman versus Eryk Anders. So these two were supposed to fight on the last card, the last pay-per-view card, but Eryk Anders pulled out due to an injury. So that's going to give Weidman another advantage going into this fight because he didn't have an injury. So he's essentially extending his training camp with no hindrances at all. Anders has to, right? Anders had to take more time for recovery. And in the original prediction, I did have Chris Weidman winning, and I think he's going to win this one as well. I think he's overall the more technical fighter in the striking, wrestling, and grappling. Anders is tough. He can hit decently hard, I guess, combined with Weidman's arguably weakened chin, but then again, Weidman looked really good against Bruno Silva. Looking before the eye pokes, like Weidman was performing very well, like better than we've seen him in years. His jabs on point, good 1-2 combo, good kicks, always had a good ability to mix up his wrestling with the striking. I think the well-roundedness of Weidman is going to get the win here, so I'm going with Chris Weidman by a decision. And for Eryk Anders, he's not amazing at anything, right? He's like a jack of all trades, except that he's incredibly tough. I mean, this guy took huge shots from Khalil Roundtree, Thiago Santos. This guy's very hard to finish, but you do see that his durability is declining. He got dropped by Jamie Pickett and Marc-Andre Barriault in back-to-back fights. This is a fighter who rarely ever gets knocked down if you don't look at the Khalil Roundtree fight where he got knocked down 4 times, but he's taken so much damage throughout his career, you're starting to see a decline of his chin. He could get finished, but I'm going to go with Chris Weidman by a decision. And then we go to the first fight of the prelims, the sleeper of the night, Randy Brown versus Bryan Battle. They have Bryan Battle as a minus 250 favorite. I think this fight is close to a pick'em. I could see stylistically Bryan Battle's volume can win the fight, as Randy Brown is usually just picking his shots and moving around, but if he gets cut off like Jack Della Maddalena did, Randy Brown runs into a lot of issues against the fence. So I do think the volume of Bryan Battle is the main way he can win this fight, but I do think the reach of Randy Brown can give Bryan Battle a lot of issues in the striking. Perhaps Battle tries to take the fight to the ground. He is the more well-rounded fighter. I mean, this guy even shot takedowns on Kevin Jousset, of all fighters. Didn't get the fight to the ground, but we've seen him take opponents to the ground before and submit them. That's another way he can win the fight as well. That can be a way he wins the fight as well. Zaleski dos Santos took him down several times in their fight, right? And I think if Zaleski can take the fight to the ground, Bryan Battle should be able to take him down at least a few times, right? Because Randy Brown's striking is very dynamic. He has a snappy jab, good 1-2 combos, really good footwork. Will overextend with the right hook sometime. You saw that against Dos Santos, but then you look at the way he knocked out Muslim Salikov. Perfect 1-1-2 combo. The kind of right hand where it just it doesn't even look like it hits his opponent until you see it in slow motion. The punch connects and goes right through. Now, I do think Bryan Battle has a better chin than Salikov. He should be able to take some big shots, but those kind of big shots from Brown win rounds at least, right? If it doesn't get a knockout. But that's what makes this fight so hard to predict, because I can see Bryan Battle being well-rounded enough to win the fight using both his striking and wrestling in sequences, but I can see Randy Brown landing some big shots in moments, winning rounds because of that. But I'm gonna go with Bryan Battle. I don't think he's a minus 250 favorite. That's way too big. Randy Brown's a lot better than that, but I do think Battle's well-roundedness is going to win him this fight. He could also land some big shots. Randy Brown's not the most durable fighter, and the biggest thing I like about Battle is that his fight IQ is really showing, is that he's showing his fight IQ. He's fighting more intelligent every single time he competes, learning after every single performance. Even when he wins, they usually say you learn from your losses. Bryan Battle learns from both his wins and losses and always gets better for the next fight. So I'm going with Bryan Battle by decision, and I cannot wait for the post-fight interview. He's becoming like the must-see interview fighters after a win. And then we go to the fight that should be on the main card, and the winner might get a title shot. Movsar Evloev versus Aljamain Sterling. So top featherweight contender versus also top featherweight contender, but former bantamweight champion, one of the greatest bantamweights of all time. And both fighters are primarily grapplers. I think Aljamain has the better Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Movsar might have the better wrestling. They both seem to be around the same size, which is crazy that Aljamain was fighting at a weight class below. He was always one of the biggest bantamweights. But I think Movsar has better fundamental striking, not necessarily more effective. Aljamain is awkward with his stand-up. He throws everything extremely long and has a lot of volume with his striking as well that mixes in his wrestling so well. But can he take Movsar to the ground? He doesn't need to. He could jump on the back just like he did against Corey Sandhagen. Give one moment of some kind of imbalance in the feet and Aljamain can submit you, which is insane. But Evloev is probably going to be the best grappler Aljamain has ever fought. The total package. Henry Cejudo's the best wrestler, but Movsar is really good at everything when it comes to grappling. I don't know if he's better than Aljamain though. I think Aljamain has the overall grappling advantage, and he also has better distance management with his striking. Movsar can sometimes run into shots, and sometimes he whiffs on punches, which can open him up to counters from Aljamain. He's not the most powerful fighter, so he probably won't knock Movsar out or anything, but Aljamain lands his shots more than Movsar does usually. The thing is, Movsar is technically undefeated in the UFC. He hasn't lost at all, but his last two fights, very, very close. I thought Arnold Allen beat him. I scored that fight for Allen, and Diego Lopez looked really strong in that first round, coming into that fight on short notice. It'll be awesome to see that rematch later, but I don't know. This is a very tough fight to call. I think it's a close fight no matter who wins, but the thing is, Movsar is not necessarily like a fighter who always gets close to finishing his opponent. You know, he's never had a finish in the UFC. All of his wins are by decision, and he rarely ever even goes for submissions in his fights, being the grappler that he is. So I think even if he takes down Aljamain's going to put him in a lot of submissions, and that racks up on points to win rounds. I mean, we've seen Aljamain submit to Kei Mizugaki with an arm triangle off of his back. He's one of the most dangerous submission artists we've seen in the sport. Lately, he's been more of like a controlling wrestler in his fights, but he still has that arsenal to submit his opponent at any moment in the fight. So I'm going to go with Aljamain Sterling here to win by decision. I think his submission attempts and counter striking is going to win him the fight. Wow, he's a plus 200 underdog. Well, I'm going with Aljamain here, man. The big underdog pick. And then we go to two fan favorites. Vicente Luque versus Themba Gorimbo, who's stepping up on short notice. It was supposed to be Nick Diaz versus Vicente Luque, but this is going to be an interesting fight. I think Themba Gorimbo is the favorite, right? Even though he is stepping up on short notice. Yeah, he's a minus 210 favorite. Man, I do agree with it. I'm going to go with Themba Gorimbo. If this was prime Vicente Luque, I would pick Luque to win this fight 100%, but he has never looked the same since Jeff Neal. Just took way too much damage in his career. He literally had a brain hemorrhage from the Jeff Neal fight, and also probably accumulation of all the damage he's taken in his career because he never really had great head movement or great striking defense other than picking his hands up. He was really good at blocking punches, but he would eat a lot of big shots, and that was definitely shown when he fought Wonder Boy. And then see him get absolutely destroyed by Jeff Neal in that third round and suffered a severe injury to the brain. I'm surprised he ever even came back to fight again. He didn't look the same against RDA. He wrestled for the majority of that fight, which is something he doesn't normally do, especially in his prime, right? In his prime, he was mostly striking and had dangerous submission skills, shown in the Michael Chiesa and Tyron Woodley fights, but his striking was always so dangerous to contest with. Against RDA, he didn't go that route. He went more of a safer route, which is also showing high fight IQ to wrestle RDA, knowing that he most likely had the striking advantage as well. But then you see him fight Joaquin Buckley, and it was like he gave up right away. Like his body just didn't want to respond to taking that ground and pound. As soon as the fight went to the ground, he just, not really submitted, he just kind of gave up. He didn't fight back, he didn't try to get up, he didn't really do anything except covering up before any big shot even landed in the first place. It's like he knew knew he was in a bad grappling position and he was going to take some big shots. So might as well just let the fight end, right? Don't take any more brain damage. And Themba Gorimbo hits decently hard. He has a lot of momentum moving forward and he's as confident as ever. He is super hungry to make the most of this opportunity, dropping Pete Rodriguez with that overhand, but it was also used to set up the double leg. He also did drop Takashi Sato as well. So he has some power, but he also has very good wrestling. He's going to be the faster fighter of the two, and most likely is going to stay standing unless Luque starts landing some shots, because Luque still has a lot of power. He's going to keep striking with Luque, but if he starts getting hit by Luque, that's where we're probably going to see more wrestling out of Themba Gorimbo, and the ground and pound is going to start landing, and I really hope Vicente Luque actually defend himself, trying to get back up to his feet, but if his brain really cannot take more damage, he should not be fighting. Honestly, I'm just surprised he was ever allowed to fight after the brain injury. So I'm going with Themba Gorimbo by a third round TKO. And then we go to the main card. And then we go to the featured fight of the prelims on ESPN before the main card. Anthony Smith versus Dominick Reyes. The two GOATs of the UFC. Both the fighters that have beaten Jon Jones in some kind of way. Dominick Reyes actually should have won the fight, and Anthony Smith beat Jon Jones in his own head. Therefore, both are the greatest fighters of all time. No one could beat Anthony Smith on paper. So therefore, you have to go with Anthony Smith. No, I'm joking. I'm going Dominick Reyes here. He looked really good in this last fight. Knocking out Dustin Jacoby is such a big win for him because Dustin Jacoby's a respectable striker. That pivoting left hand while moving backwards from Dominick Reyes. No light heavyweight does it better than him, ever. Where do you see light heavyweights able to redirect with their punches on the back foot like Reyes does? Regardless of what we saw in the Ryan Spann, Yuri Prohaska, and Jan Blachowicz fights, Dominick Reyes does have some phenomenal skills for a light heavyweight striker. So where it looks like Reyes is getting his confidence back, Anthony Smith, not so much. He lost to Roman Dolidze at light heavyweight, and not really a great fight. He beat Vitor Petrino, but Vitor Petrino, I don't know what he was doing holding up Anthony Smith that long. They get snatched up by a guillotine. He got destroyed by Khalil Roundtree. He beat Ryan Spann in a split decision, but it's against the same opponent he's beaten before. I think Dominick Reyes wins this fight by a TKO, either in the first or second rounds. Anthony Smith is slower than he's ever been. He used to have a very good jab and right straight, but it has slowed down considerably if you look at the Roman Dolidze fight. Whereas Dominick Reyes, firing on all cylinders right now. Punches are as fast as ever, hits very hard, the better striker, always been the better striker. You take any version of Anthony Smith and any version of Dominick Reyes, Reyes has always been the better striker of the two. Smith, though, is dangerous on the ground, but how does he take down Reyes? Jon Jones could barely even keep this guy down, and Smith never really had the best wrestling. He could double leg you into the fence and get you down like that, but Reyes has so much better footwork, way faster, able to redirect even against takedowns if he needs to. Not only can he redirect from punches and land counters, but I think he should be able to also redirect from takedowns and land counters off of that, especially against a slower opponent like Anthony Smith. Smith also doesn't have the best defense once he starts throwing his own punches, and I think Reyes can land some big counters off of that. Body kicks are going to be there for Dominick Reyes. I think it's going to be a striking clinic from Dominick Reyes in this fight, TKOing the tough Anthony Smith, and then let his alternate persona, Bogdan Gushkov, take over for him. No, but I'm going Dominick Reyes by a TKO. And then we go to the main card, starting with Nate Landwehr versus Doo Ho Choi. I'm going Doo Ho Choi. I think he's the better boxer of the two. Nate Landwehr is decently well at pulling away from punches, hand trapping, finding shots off of that. He puts a lot of pressure on opponents, but Choi's going to meet him in the center of the cage and try to exchange with him. The thing is, though, Landwehr can take a lot of damage, man. He's got that dog in him. He can take a lot of damage. He's been dropped a couple times in his career. Dan Ige dropped him. David Onama dropped, almost looked like he knocked him out with that overhand, but he was somehow able to recover. Choi hits very hard as well, and he's extremely precise with his punches. The only thing that Choi doesn't have compared to someone like Dan Ige is the defense. He's there to be hit a lot of times. He doesn't really move his head that much, and he doesn't pick up his hands that much either. His footwork is good though. He's able to move back for counter punches, and know that Landwehr is going to be very aggressive. There might be a lot of openings for Choi to land his counters. But the thing is, Landwehr a lot of times leans his head back. That's how he got dropped by David Onama. You just extend the jab and then a right hand, and you'll catch Landwehr's chin. Doo Ho Choi has a powerful one too, also with very good body shots. Landwehr did beat Jamal Emmers, but Emmers landed some good body shots there, right? There were moments that you could see where Doo Ho Choi can have success with the body punches. But if Landwehr wins this fight, it just shows he's got that dog in him, right? He's able to take some damage. He's able to just be a bit too aggressive and land his own shots. He hits hard. Doo Ho Choi doesn't have the best defense. So I can see Landwehr winning the fight, but I think Doo Ho Choi should be a slight favorite going into it because of how technical and powerful his boxing is. But I wouldn't be surprised at all if Nate Landwehr pulls it off. That's going to be such a banger, man. Cannot wait for that fight. And then we go to the questionable matchup on the card. Bryce Mitchell versus Kron Gracie. Why is Kron Gracie fighting a top 15 fighter? He's coming off 2 losses and barely ever fights. Kron Gracie's only fought twice in the last 5 years, and both of those are losses to Cub Swanson and Charles Jourdain. Why does he get to fight Bryce Mitchell? I don't get it. But it should be a good win for Bryce Mitchell. He should be a massive favorite going into it. He's the far better striker. Kron Gracie has very good jiu-jitsu, and in the pure sense of that, he should be better than Bryce. But when you bring in ground and pound, it changes it completely. As they say, punch a black belt, he turns into a purple belt. And I don't see Mitchell going to the ground. There's no way he loses this fight, unless he purposely tried to lose. Kron Gracie is very slow in the stand-up. He tries to mimic that Diaz boxing style, but he just doesn't have the power. He doesn't have the technique. He doesn't have much of the reflexes just in general, or the instincts of a boxer. Bryce Mitchell is a way better striker. This is the same guy who dropped Edson Barboza. Can't overlook Bryce Mitchell because of the knockout loss to Josh Emmett. You know what Josh Emmett would do to Kron Gracie? That one loss to Josh Emmett is not going to change that. Unless it does, and that'd be horrible, right? You're just never the same after a knockout like that. I mean, Bryce was having a seizure from that knockout. But even still, sprawl and technical brawling for Bryce Mitchell should win the fight. Kron Gracie doesn't have good takedowns. He mostly just tries to shoot and pull guard or something like that. Or then we go to the heavyweight fight. The winner most likely going to get a title shot, and it's a rematch. Ciryl Gane versus Alexander Volkov 2. I'm going Ciryl Gane. He won the first fight, not easily, but comfortably. Like, he showed a lot of great skills against Volkov, which is very interesting, right? One of the best strikers he's ever fought, and he was performing at the level that he was. Just shows how good of a striker Ciryl Gane is. In my opinion, he's the best heavyweight striker of all time, right? I don't think it's hard to deny that. The way he was winning the striking against Francis Ngannou, he outstruck Volkov, he outstruck everyone he's fought besides John Jones, where it was barely standing up, right? Where he has amazing striking for a heavyweight. He has some of the most abysmal takedown defense. Does Volkov try to wrestle him? I don't know. You can only imagine that Gane has been focusing on his wrestling ever since losing to John Jones. So we can only imagine Gane's takedown defense has gotten much, much better, right? It has to. Unless, what has this guy been doing in training if his takedown defense hasn't gotten better? The main place he needs to focus his training is in his wrestling. But Alexander Volkov is coming off an amazing performance against Sergey Pavlovich, outstriking that monster from beginning to end. 3-round domination. But even still, man, Ciryl Gane's the faster fighter. He's technically better than Volkov, I think, which also combines into his athletic ability. He's way more athletic, able to get away from shots. His footwork is the main way he beats Volkov. Volkov barely moves in there. He's like a tall, stationary striker, whereas Ciryl Gane's moving all over the place. He has the reach advantage too, which is not great for Volkov. He has to get in closer to land his punches, but he does have the kicking range, at least. But it's usually hard to kick Ciryl Gane effectively just because of how fast he is. He's able to get in and out and move on angles faster than any other heavyweight, and the only heavyweight that can compare to him is Tom Aspinall. And we saw the combinations that Gane was able to land on Volkov in their first fight. Getting in, 2 to 3 punch combinations, getting out on angles, and Volkov just not able to land as many meaningful strikes. So I think it's going to be another good performance out of Ciryl Gane. I'll strike in Alexander Volkov for 3 rounds. Maybe Volkov does land a few good shots here, countering Gane on his way in with like an uppercut or something like that. But stylistically, man, Ciryl Gane has such an advantage here, mainly for his footwork and athleticism. And I think he should get a title shot if he beats Volkov against the winner of Tom Aspinall versus John Jones. That should be the fight. And then we go to the featured fights on the card, the 2 5-round fights, starting with the co-main event, Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Ian Garry. Respect to both fighters. They didn't have to take this fight. Shavkat could have waited for Bilal, right? Bilal said he wasn't going to stay out too long, so maybe a few months, Shavkat gets right back in there and fights Bilal, but he said, no, I want to fight. I signed the contract to fight in December. I'm fighting in December. That's a championship mentality right there. And then Ian Garry, he's essentially like 1 fight away from a title shot himself. But he'd rather take that fight against a former training partner, one of the scariest guys in the weight class, on short notice. He didn't need to do that. He could have just fought Jack Della, had a scheduled fight or something like that. Or maybe against Kamaru Usman or anybody else, or Leon Edwards. He could have waited for a training camp to get his title shot, but instead was willing to step up on short notice. Respect to Ian Garry. And do you know what the crazy thing about both these fighters is? They essentially beat like the same fighters, except that Shavkat had more impressive performances. So they both beat Jeff Neal, they both beat Neil Magny, and Shavkat beat Stephen Thompson and Ian Garry beat Michael Page. Almost the same fighter, right? They both essentially beat the same ranked fighters, but Shavkat had better performances. He finished all 3 of them. Ian Garry went to a decision with all 3 and almost lost to Michael Page, went to a split decision against Jeff Neal and couldn't finish Neil Magny even though he had him hurt out there with leg kicks. That will make any fan automatically picked Shavkat to beat Ian Garry. They fought the same guys essentially, and Shavkat looked better in those fights. The only thing is, Shavkat got hurt against Jeff Neal, whereas Ian Garry never got hurt by any of those fighters. But Ian Garry did get dropped by Song Kenan. Shavkat never got dropped in his career, and the only guy he got hurt by was from Jeff Neal. But that doesn't mean that Shavkat automatically wins the fight. Styles make fights, and Ian Garry does have a style to make this a very difficult fight for Shavkat. He's the better boxer of the two. Technically, he is. Shavkat's got good hands, but his defensive boxing is not on the level of Ian Garry's. He doesn't have the best head movement. Sometimes he doesn't even block punches. Ian Garry has a well-rounded boxing defensive skill set. He can move his head decently well. He has good footwork. He picks up his hands most of the time, could fight in both stances doing the same. He's got much better fundamentals in his boxing than Shavkat. I think Shavkat might be the better kicker though. He has some of the most accurate spinning kicks in the sport. And also he's the better grappler of the two. Now, they both sparred with each other before, and the only thing we saw was them striking, and apparently Shavkat said that he has submitted Ian Garry, but Ian Garry's wife refuses to release that. The only thing she released was them striking with each other, where it looks like Ian Garry might have an advantage. But Shavkat said, no, man, they don't want to show the grappling part of that because they know what happens once they go to the ground. But the thing is, can Shavkat get the fight to the ground? He has taken down most of his opponents, and he is one of the most lethal submission artists in welterweight history. So I can see Ian Garry moving in and out, landing 1-2 combos, landing counter shots and all this sort of stuff, leg kicks, front kicks to the body. Shavkat constantly pressuring forward, landing his own jabs, 1-2 combos, throwing out his own leg kicks and body kicks, but I do see him taking a few big shots. Jeff Neal landed some big shots on Shavkat with those swift combinations. Ian Garry can do the same. He's not as powerful as Jeff Neal, but he is very sharp as a puncher when he really wants to be. And from there, I can see Shavkat shooting in takedowns, and I think he could get the fight to the ground. I mean, Song Kenan, Gabe Green, and Darian Weeks took him down. Now, Weeks is a good wrestler. Even though he lost all of his UFC fights, he is a good, strong wrestler. So maybe Shavkat is not as good of a wrestler as Weeks is, but he might be better than Gabe Green, and he's definitely better than Song Kenan. He's got different kind of wrestling though. He's not like a powerful shooter. He'll drive his opponent to the cage and then trip him out from there, and I think he could do the same to Ian Garry. Now, Ian Garry is very long, and usually long fighters against the fence are hard to trip and sweep to the ground. But the thing is, Shavkat's like the same height. It says that Shavkat is 6'1" and Ian Garry is 6'3". But have you ever seen them next to each other or up against Neil Magny? They're like all the same height. Shavkat has to be 6'3". I think they messed up on his height. When he faced off with Wonderboy, who's 6 feet tall, technically Shavkat should be only an inch taller. Bro was clearly like 2 to 3 inches taller than Wonderboy. I mean, look at this. This is supposed to be an inch difference. Now, he has his hat, but Shavkat also has like a big head, right? He's got like a tall head. Look how much higher like his chin is to Wonderboy's. And he has a bigger head than Wonderboy too. This is supposed to be 6'1" versus 6 foot. They're doing that whole thing with like Godofredo Pepe. You guys remember him? When they said he was 5'7", but he was the same height as Andre Fili, who's 5'11". So I think with Ian Garry against the cage, he should be able to trip him out and not really have as much of a problem because he's essentially like the same height as Garry. So I'm going to go Shavkat Rakhmonov in a very, very close fight. I think his grappling is going to make the difference. Ian Garry hasn't shown the best takedown defense. That's the main reason. If he was just standing and let's say he had insane takedown defense, then I would pick Ian Garry because I do think he's the better striker of the two. But when you mix in the grappling, it changes up the striking exchanges, and Shavkat is definitely better on the ground. It's going to be a fun fight, but Shavkat's a minus 350 favorite. Those are some crazy odds right there. So I'm going to go with Shavkat by a 3rd round submission. And then we go to the main event. Alexandre Pantoja versus Kai Asakura, which should resemble a grappler versus striker matchup, but Alexandre Pantoja has respectable power in his punches, where he lacks a lot of the technique. He's a brawler on the feet. He dropped Brandon Moreno very quickly in their fight with a left hook. He's extremely aggressive, and that could get him dropped by Kai Asakura, who is maybe the most technical and precise striker he's ever fought. I won't say Asakura is the most powerful striker because Alexandre Pantoja fought Davison Figueiredo, who was only able to drop him once, and still the only fighter that ever dropped Pantoja in the fight. But the fight comes down to, can Kai Asakura stop the takedown? Pantoja's not the best wrestler out there. He is very scrappy and aggressive, and sometimes just like chaotically gets the fight to the ground. He's not like a Henry Cejudo or something like that. You know, he's not wrestling on that level. And Kai Asakura has gone against good grapplers at Ryzen. So this is his first UFC fight. He's getting a title shot main eventing a pay-per-view. Now, he did fight Juan Archuleta, who's a good wrestler, also had good Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. That's the best fight to look at out of Kai Asakura's career, because that was the best grappler he's ever fought. But other guys like Shuto Watanabe is good at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, not so much wrestling. Kyoji Horiguchi is more well-rounded, but that Archuleta fight is the main one to look at, and he was defending takedowns very well. And that gets kind of scary for Pantoja when you look at that fight. You see Asakura sprawling on takedowns, denying takedown shots, showing good footwork and very fast and explosive to react to those takedowns. And it's like, dang, if Pantoja cannot get the fight to the ground, how does he win this? Because Kai Asakura is definitely the better striker of the two. There's one big thing that changes: the cage. Over there in Ryzen, they're fighting in a ring with ropes. So it's a lot harder to drive takedowns against the ropes and fight off of that effectively, like you can in a cage. Alexandre Pantoja gets a good amount of his takedowns off of the fence, right? He'll shoot against the fence and get his opponent down from there, whether picking up and slamming them or just getting a double leg or something like that. It changes the variables in a fight. And Kai Asakura has never fought in a cage at Ryzen, right? The majority of his MMA career has been in a ring. And also in the UFC, there are no ground and knees. And when I go back and watch Asakura's fights, it's such a bummer. It's like, dude, when you see him start kneeing these wrestlers who are trying to take him to the ground, it makes you want them in the UFC even more. It's like, look how effective it is. Look how technical you can be with ground and knees and stuff like that. Seeing Kai Asakura landing knees on Shuto Watanabe, it's like, yo, we want to see that in the UFC with the best fighters in the world. Why can't we see that? And it could change the trajectory of a fight. But because the UFC does not have ground and knees, Kai Asakura has to be careful of not instinctively throwing a knee if he defends a takedown, because that's usually what he does. When he defends takedowns, he'll throw out a kick, he'll throw knees on the ground, and he's very quick to do that. I do see him stuffing a few takedowns in the fight, but with him not being able to knee and the cage being there so Pantoja can push Asakura up against it and then work for another takedown, it completely changes the fight for Kai Asakura, and I think it gives Pantoja such a big advantage. I can see in moments that Asakura is going to be kind of lost on the ground close to the fence, and Pantoja eventually getting the back and choking Asakura out in like the 3rd or 4th rounds. I do see Asakura landing some big shots, even hurting Pantoja. Might be the second fighter to drop Pantoja in a fight, but eventually Alexandre Pantoja is going to show his toughness. The guy has such resolve, just no quit in him, one of the toughest fighters we've ever seen. This guy will walk down someone like Davison Figueiredo after taking bombs to the face, just trying to win the entire time. It'd be shocking if Asakura stuffed every single takedown. And I think if Pantoja lands one takedown, he can win the fight off of that alone. So I'm gonna go with Alexandre Pantoja, and I think he's gonna win by a 3rd or 4th round submission. Should be a great fight. And with that, let's go right to the odds. For any bettors out there, let's see what are the best lines, parlays, and picks for any of these fighters. So Pantoja's like an average minus 270 favorite. Kai Asakura is like a plus 215. I can see Pantoja winning with those lines. I would completely skip the Shavkat fight, unless you're going with Ian Garry, because that is massive, right? He can absolutely win that fight. But if you think Shavkat's going to win, I don't recommend going with him. Ciryl Gane's like a minus 350 about. He should win. I mean, I guess that's kind of comfortable. Bryce Mitchell, he's like a minus 800. Yeah, that's an absolute win for Bryce Mitchell. But not as a single pick. I think only go with Bryce Mitchell in a parlay. Or if you think he's going to win by a decision or something like that, or submission. Duo Choi's the underdog. Interesting. I do like him as a slight underdog. Dominick Reyes, big favorite, minus 350 about. Yeah, I think he's a comfortable pick. Themba Gorimbo, he's a slight favorite. That's actually very good. I'd go with Themba Gorimbo. Definitely pick him. Aljamain's a big underdog. I like Aljamain. That's my dog of the card. Bryan Battle, a minus 225 favorite. Yeah, I would not pick either of them. I don't like those lines. Chris Weidman and Eryk Anders is a pick'em. Oh, that is a Weidman pick, 100%. I thought he'd be a bigger favorite. Joshua Van, slight favorite. That's a good pick. I would not pick Griffin or Chiesa. Too close of a fight. Chase Hooper's a minus 1,000 favorite. Is it even worth it? Or is it worth putting something on Clay Guida? Maybe if he brings back his caveman hair, he can win somehow. I guess Chase Hooper with a parlay, like a big parlay. And then Kenny Nzechukwu, yeah, I think he's a comfortable win. But it's a heavyweight division. The lines are so wide apart, I probably wouldn't pick either of them. But I do think Kennedy should win the fight. So those are the predictions for the UFC 310 card. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you guys did, make sure to give the video a like, make sure to subscribe with the bell for notifications. And I'll see you guys in the next video.